Hello. So I'm here tonight to talk to you about critical thinking and whether or not it matters. This talk used to have a different title, but my friends convinced me that that was sort of harsh. And so I needed to develop a new thesis, which was not that people are stupid, but rather that people think badly. But then that left me with a new problem, which was, why do people think badly? Well, my first thought was maybe they don't have a lot of formal education. But personal experience has shown me that formal education is no shield against shoddy thinking. Next, I thought maybe they just don't have good information. And then my final thought was maybe those people are just gullible. I was surprised to find out that that's a word that doesn't appear in any dictionary. Let me talk about some historical examples of bad thinking. This is Charles Ponzi. He was a charming Italian immigrant to the United States in the 1920s. And he had an amazing new investment idea. Word got around about this idea, and investors poured their money in. What Ponzi would do for you is if you parked your money with him for 30 days, he would return it with up to a 50% increase just 1 month later. So again, that became a very popular idea. Well, people at the time didn't realize that Ponzi was the inventor of what's now known as a pyramid scheme, also known as a Ponzi game. But until they realized that, a lot of people made a lot of money right up until they didn't when the scheme collapsed. Ponzi went to jail for a brief time and then was deported back to his native country. Perpetual motion machines have held a real fascination for inventors for the last several hundred, if not 1,000 years. The idea of extracting free energy somehow is a very, very lucrative and seductive one. Now, to do that, you have to play with the laws of thermodynamics. Everybody know the laws of thermodynamics, right? You can't win, you can't break even, you can't get out of the game, right? So, that said, perpetual motion machines tried to defy that through clever systems using magnets and waterfalls and siphons and gravity and counterweights. They purport to extract free energy from the universe somehow. The patent office of the United States government was so besieged by applications for these things that finally they said, no more. Stop bothering us unless you can bring us a working model that you can park out in our outer office where it will run for 1 year with no intervention. And since then, applications have been way down. This is a rendition of snake oil. Snake oil is kind of a catch-all term from the last 100 years or so ago. Pre-FDA, Food and Drug Administration, anybody could put anything in foods or drugs, and they frequently did. A real popular ingredient in cough medicines at that time was laudanum. Now, laudanum we now know as morphine, which is an extremely effective cough suppressant. In FDA, pre-FDA, non-regulated dosage days, it's also an exceptionally effective breathing suppressant, which is one way to cure your cough. This is Ellen White. Ellen White was a prophetess. She told people around her that she was getting visions from heaven, and people started to believe her. They were listening when she told them that the world was going to end in 1841. And again in 1843. And yet again in 1845. Well, you'd think by then that nobody really would have been listening, but thousands of people flocked to her side. They doubled down on these failed predictions. When she predicted it yet again, the end of the world, in 1851, people were not really disturbed that time. Maybe they were a little relieved that the world wasn't ending. But the important thing is she kept getting visions. And eventually she had a vision of a school on a hill. And she found a partner, and they built Loma Linda University. Rhinos. rhinos came up in a talk earlier tonight, and I want to talk about rhino horn. An earlier speaker talked about a horn on a rhino that was worth $2 million. And the reason it's worth a lot of money is because of really shabby critical thinking. The idea of using powdered rhino horn as a cure for fever or impotence has been around for thousands of years. And because people are too dumb or too lazy to go out and buy aspirin or Viagra, we have this beautiful creature that's being driven right to the edges of extinction. Okay, well, so I've shown you that historically people think badly. Well, why do they think badly is our next question, and I have some renditions here. This is an example of what's known by psychologists as groupthink. Groupthink means when you're a part of a group that wears uniforms or has a secret password or is what psychologists call an in-group, it's really hard, literally, to step out of line with the decisions of that group. A member of the National Security Council of the United States government blamed groupthink for the unanimous decision to go to war against Iraq. The Ash experiment. The Ash experiment basically the Ash experiment was put together by a psychologist of that name, and he discovered that if you have people look at the line on the left and then ask them which of those three lines, A, B, or C, is the line on the left most like, if 9 people say A, the 10th person, not knowing that the other 9 people are collaborating in advance with the experimenter, that 10th person will almost invariably fall in line and say A as well, showing the power of social uniformity. This is my favorite. This is Dunning-Kruger effect. Dunning and Kruger are 2 psychologists at Cornell University, and they became fascinated with the idea of incompetence after reading a story about a bank robber who successfully robbed 2 banks but was unsuccessful at evading capture. Now, the reason for that was that the bank robber knew that lemon juice can be used for invisible ink writing. And he made the jump in reasoning that if he coated his face with lemon juice prior to robbing the bank, it would render him invisible to the bank's security cameras. Now, that didn't work out so well. His friends identified him on the evening news, and Dunning and Kruger came away with their big takeaway, which was this: truly incompetent people are too incompetent to even recognize their own incompetence. Okay, so I've shown you historically people think badly. There may be some hardwired reasons we need to overcome with regards to thinking badly. There's a couple of tools. There's a lot of tools out there, but there's just a couple that I'm going to put out in front of you today. This is William of Ockham. He was a priest about 1,000 years ago who came up with what I think is a really great idea. It's now known as Occam's razor. And Occam's razor is this: all things being the same in any given situation, the simplest solution is usually the correct one. Seem good? So that means when you lose your keys, you don't need to invoke the CIA or alien abduction. Basically, you just laid your keys down, you were tired, and they're probably somewhere in your house. If you read a news story about an announced military exercise in Texas, you don't need to put together a conspiracy with secret prisons in the basements of abandoned Walmarts, because it's probably what it is on its face: a military exercise that's been previously announced in Texas. This is my favorite example. This is one I hope you'll take away tonight. This is Emily Rosa. Emily Rosa is the youngest person to have her name on a peer-reviewed professional paper in a medical journal, and at 9 years old. Now, the thing about Emily was she became fascinated with an idea that was making the rounds in the 1970s in the United States, a pseudo-medicine called touch therapy. Touch therapy practitioners claimed that they could see an aura around people, that they could not only see this aura, but they could touch it, they could manipulate it to diagnose and treat disease. It's hard to refute that. How do you know that I can't see your auras? It's hard to prove. But Emily Rosa asked for some practitioners to help her in an experiment. They willingly did so. I think they truly believed that they were able to see those auras and feel them, which was the critical part of her experiment. She had a large piece of cardboard, taller than her, and then cut a hole in it large enough to put your hand through. She then invited practitioners to put their hand through the cardboard hole, with her standing on the other side where they couldn't see her, and then tell her whether or not they could feel her aura as she suspended it above their hands. Well, when they added up the results, the practitioners didn't even do as well as the law of averages would dictate. So that was a multi-million-dollar industry brought down by a little girl with a big piece of cardboard. It means you don't need a lot of formal education or fancy equipment to be able to think critically. What about this? Does any of this matter? People say to me, Bart, why don't you just leave those people alone? Everybody can think what they want. I'm going, no, they can't. There's a reason for that. Let me show you why. And I want to say, not everybody is on board with this program. A major political party in a major state, I won't name either, it was the Republicans in Texas, passed a resolution in their legislature banning critical thinking in public schools. Which gives everybody here at SAS a big advantage because you're a private school, right? Okay, this is why it matters. About 15 years ago in New York City, this man began to offer this fantastic return to investors. If they brought money to him, a year later he'd return it with huge gains, no questions asked. And people didn't ask questions. Everybody recognize Bernie Madoff? This time, thousands of people lost millions of dollars, and lives, including that of the Madoff family, were ruined. This is Jim Jones. He was a charismatic preacher in Southern California in the 1970s. He convinced his followers that they were going to be persecuted and imprisoned by the U.S. government for their religious beliefs. He invited them to a colony in South America, which he had founded. They did that. There, he grew increasingly isolated and more paranoid, and then finally told his followers that now the U.S. government was coming for them, and they would be imprisoned for their religious beliefs. And the only escape was to follow him directly to heaven, which 900 of them did, drinking cyanide out of vats filled with grape Kool-Aid. Well, what about this? People say to me, well, maybe I could just do some research on the internet and then make up my own mind, decide for myself. I'll tell you, that's a really bad idea. This is what you get out of that. The anti-vaccine advocates over the last 2 decades have led the way in the resurgence of childhood diseases that were nearly extinct just a few years ago. Disneyland last year had an outbreak of measles. How 1950s is that? Some people, when they look up in the sky and see chemtrails, is what they see when they see jet contrails going overhead, and they say, oh, the government must be spraying us with nefarious chemicals for some reason. If you ask them, what about that? Where's your evidence? They'll say, sorry, you're either part of the problem, you're part of the conspiracy, or you're a dupe of the mainstream media. Homeopathy is a pseudo-medicine based on the idea that the smaller the dosage of a medication, the more effective it is. You heard that, right? And that means that these sugar pills I'm showing you should be perfect for curing the headache you're probably getting from this talk, because they contain 0% aspirin. They should be 100% effective. Okay, P.T. Barnum said, there's a sucker born every minute. Actually, P.T. Barnum didn't even say that. One of his competitors did. But what it comes down to is there's always going to be a crop of new people coming along that need to be educated. You know somebody's going to walk out of here and go to their dictionary, right? And be looking under G for gullible. Let me close with this story. This is where this is all, is that it's not a process that's ever going to end. In Bali, in Indonesia, they tell a charming story of a creature called the rangda. And the rangda periodically comes out of the forest and clouds men's minds and makes them think badly and do evil things. And when that happens, the baranga needs to come out of the forest, and that's a power for good, and it battles the rangda, and it drives it back into the forest after diminishing it. but it can never kill it. It represents the struggle, the eternal cyclical struggle between good and evil. And I think with critical thinking, it's the same thing. Essentially, this is a process that's never ending, and it's one that we can't ever really hope to win, but it's one that we can't afford to lose. Thanks very much.